This week, we've been learning a lot about one of the gifts that John Nelson Darby gave us, which is dispensationalism, which brought us the rapture. That's right. All the talk about the rapture this week, we can point back to John Nelson Darby in the 1830s and his teaching on dispensationalism. But that's not the only gift he gave us that affects us in our daily life today. He also gave us the modern state of Israel. Yeah. So dispensationalism, the invention of John Nelson Darby, didn't just change the way people today read the Bible. It changed how we map the Middle East. John Nelson Darby was an Irish-English lawyer who became a minister. And then in the 1830s, he came up with a teaching, which is hard to source where from, about dispensationalism. That is, that God deals with mankind through different dispensations, different arrangements. And that dispensationalism included the idea of the rapture. Now, before 1830, there was no church, no creed, no preacher that talked about a secret rapture of the church before the Great Tribulation. There was talk about the church being caught up to the air, but this generally happened at a different time or in a different way or different meaning. John Nelson Darby, beginning of a 7-year period called the Great Tribulation, and it would happen in secret. And that's what that thief in the night kind of stuff is all about, what people were expecting to happen this week, which didn't happen. So Darby's two unique ideas. One was the secret rapture of the church, and the second is that the church is actually a parenthesis in God's plan in dealing with Israel. That's right, a parenthesis. Now, real quick about what the dispensations are. They're God's arrangement in dealing with man. And there are 7 of them, according to the dispensationalists. The first one was the age of innocence, or the dispensation of innocence. And that was from the creation of Adam to the fall. Then it was the age of conscience, man living according to his conscience, and that was from the fall until the flood. Then there was human government. So human government was God's way of dealing with man, and that was from the flood till Abraham. And then it was promise. He made a promise with Abraham. That became the way that God dealt with man, and until the law came with Moses. Then it was the dispensation of law. Then an interruption happened. Christ came and was crucified. And when he was crucified, a new age was started. It was the age of grace, the age of the church. This was the age of salvation through faith by grace. And that ends when Christ returns at the end of that age of grace to establish his kingdom, the millennial kingdom on the earth, where God resumes his plan with the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel teaches all of humanity to worship God. That's the final age, and then eternities after the 1,000 years. Those are the dispensations. And the church, being a parenthesis, allows for a huge gap in time between when Christ came and when he returns. So it's a way of saying there's a gap, and we're in that gap. And for that gap to end, catch this, there has to be some requirements. So the end of that gap is the nation of Israel has the temple, they're offering sacrifices, and the Antichrist interrupts the sacrifice in the temple with his own image to be worshiped. And that's the last 3.5 years of the 7 years of Great Tribulation, where the Antichrist went from being a good guy to being a bad guy. And then at the end of that, Christ returns and establishes his kingdom. The requirement for this all to happen is Israel as a nation with the temple sacrificing that can be interrupted. So you don't get a rapture without an Israel. You don't get a rapture without the temple. You don't get a rapture without the sacrifices that can be interrupted. And this explains so much of what has happened in history since, say, 1909. And why 1909 and 1917? Because C.I. Scofield published a book called the Scofield Reference Bible, and it was a compendium of teachings and notes along with the King James Version of the Bible, one bound edition of dispensationalist teaching together with the Bible text, which just made it more believable. And it became extremely popular, one of the most well-selling books in all of Oxford Press history as of 2011 is the Scofield Reference Bible. And that made it into households. It made it into theological seminaries. Dallas Theological Seminary, 1924, was established on dispensationalist teachings. A lot to do with the popularity through C.I. Scofield popularizing John Nelson Darby's dispensationalism. Now, John Nelson Darby, when he was alive in the 1800s, had come to America and had brought his teaching here, and it was popular in America, and it was picked up by people like D.L. Moody of Moody Bible Institute. He picked up dispensationalism from Darby himself. But it also reached politicians. And in the UK, it reached a man named Lord Balfour. And it reached another man named Lloyd George. Both men were raised in evangelical Christian households under the influence of dispensationalist teaching. And Lloyd George had made a comment, let me see the quote here. He saw himself as an instrument for carrying out divine purpose. Yeah. And one of those purposes is encapsulated in the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration reads, His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So the British Christian Zionism began before practical Jewish Zionism. Isn't that wild? By the 1940s, millions of Christians believed that the restoration of Israel as a nation was essential to the end-time prophecies. Even President Truman in 1948 saw the restoration of the nation of Israel as a key prophetic fulfillment. That's right, the President of the United States. And the result of all this was a unique alliance in the world, the American-Israeli alliance, which has lasted up to now through all kinds of different situations, different presidents, different leaderships in Israel and in America, and it's all based on this teaching given to us through John Nelson Darby, dispensationalism. And what is it related to? It's related to the rapture, to the end times. And what is that related to? It's related to a nation, a temple, sacrifices that can be interrupted, and a bad guy that kills a lot of people. That is the gift of John Nelson Darby and his influence, not only on this week with all the rapture talk, but also everything we're doing in the Middle East, all of our relations with Israel. It's a lot of stuff that we're dealing with that came from John Nelson Darby. So it doesn't end with Truman, it continues. And the movement in America to support Israel from the Christian pastors, the evangelical Christian pastors, the MAGA pastors, the ultra MAGA pastors who don't necessarily like Jews in person, but they support Israel. They're working with the Temple Institute to reestablish the temple itself, which requires some destruction of what's already there. That's going to be problematic. And then the rebuilding of a temple, the reinstituting of sacrifices, which requires a red heifer, which the Texas cattlemen have already reproduced and sent over to Israel to create the garments, to reinstitute the Aaronic priesthood. All of this stuff is being funded by Christians in America with aid to Israeli organizations and even participation with the Israeli government itself. So one man's theological innovation in 1830 didn't just give us endless dates of prediction of the rapture, but also gave us the nation state of Israel and shaped a century of American foreign policy to this day. The next time people mention John Nelson Darby and the rapture, remind them that he didn't just predict the end of the world, he helped reshape it.